humanity stands at a crossroads. We have a choice between freedom and fear, ignorance or truth. The Great Reset?
We need a great reset.
Or the Great Freeset? The World Council for Health has emerged with a comprehensive vision. We aggregate holistic, unbiased health advice from international sources, free from the shackles of vested interests. We have united over 230 unique organizations spanning 55 countries. Powering the international health sovereignty movement, we have activated 33 autonomous country councils representing voices around the world and enabling people to make the best informed choices. We see the big picture. We have a long-term vision. We implement a broad strategy that respects individuality, ethics, and life on Earth. We're powering international opinion, and we are being heard. Welcome to a new era of enlightened health discourse, empowered by science and shared wisdom. Co-create a healthy, free, and sovereign world with us, the World Council for Health. A better way for a better world.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Better Way Today. It's the 17th of March, and we've got a wonderful panel today assembled for you to discuss measles, the MMR vaccine, and why it's important not to panic. If you are missing our wonderful health and science lead, Christoph Plote, from the panel, I'd just like to let you know that in some countries, you're not even allowed to mention anything against the MMR vaccine. And Germany is one such country where talking about the MMR vaccine or raising questions about it is a criminal offense. So these are the times we live in, totalitarian times, no less. And I'll leave the wonderful guests from the United States, United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom to introduce themselves. Many of them are frequent faces, as you know, on our steering committee and part of our team. But I'd like to start off by just reading a little bit from a newspaper article from Texas, Austin, Texas, where I was 2 weeks ago. And this is from the Austin Chronicle about measles. It says, over 90 cases have been confirmed in West Texas in the last month, and according to the Texas Department of State Health Services, 16 of those have resulted in hospitalization. Dr. Desmar Walks of Austin Public Health told KUT News the outbreak is a result of a drop in vaccination rates. Measles isn't fun. According to the CDC, about 20% of unvaccinated patients, about 20% of unvaccinated patients require hospitalization. 5% of children with measles develop pneumonia. So this is in the Austin Chronicle. I can just reassure you at this point that those statistics sound very strange to me, really very extraordinarily high rates of hospitalization and measles, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our panel about what they think of these statistics. But before we go any further, I'd like to introduce Dr. Mark Trozzi as my co-host for this evening. I'm Dr. Tess, and Dr. Trozzi, Mark is going to introduce us to measles and what measles is. So over to you, Mark.
No, thanks so much, Tess, and thanks everyone for being with us. Really honored to be part of this panel. And yeah, we've just watched humanity get herded through a lot of destructive things in the name of infectious disease. So when measles, became suddenly a headline issue under, really kind of unusual situations in American politics and medicine, we agreed that whatever we were planning on talking about today, we would postpone. And we just want to make sure that people have solid, honest, unbiased, not for profit information about measles. And so I want to just start with a real quick little 3-minute like basics of measles. So Mark, Laurie, would you be able to start my little slideshow? Okay, so what is measles? Could we go to the next slide? So measles is a viral disease. It's an RNA virus. And there you could see a picture of it. Oh, Tessa's picture came up. You could see a picture of it from an electron microscope on the left. And on your right, you can see a schematic of the virus showing, sort of the parts of the virus as we understand them. Can we go to the next slide? Now, I wish this was a picture of a young child. That would be more accurate because they're more likely to be sick with measles and to be sneezing and coughing. And when someone is at that point in the measles infection, when they're sneezing and coughing, if they get sick, a lot of people aren't even sick, but if they get sick and they're sneezing or coughing, that's when they're spreading the measles virus. And it's present in the spray coming from them, and it can persist on surfaces for up to 2 hours. Could we go to the next slide? So if someone has become infected, typically a child, then there's a 10 to 12-day incubation period. So this is a period where though the virus is growing in their airway, maybe in their lymph nodes, maybe in their conjunctiva of their eyes, but they have no symptoms, they're not coughing, they're not sneezing, therefore they're not spreading droplets and they're not infectious. But after this incubation period is when the disease begins. Could I see the next slide, please? So the first stage of after incubation, it begins with basically a runny nose, a cough, and a slight fever. Also, as things progress, the patient's eyes can become red and sensitive to light. And at this point, because they're coughing or sneezing, then you are coming into the beginning of an infectious case. Could we go to the next slide? Then comes a second stage where the temperature can be higher, sometimes as high as 103 or 105. And then the rash, which is part of the symptoms, typically starts as red, slightly raised spots, starting mainly on the head and then spreading down over the body, out to the limbs, and even including the hands and soles, which is an important factor. It's usually not itchy. And the person is infectious from about 5 days before the rash, when that first stage began, when they started to cough. And then they can be infectious for about 5 days after the rash first appeared. The rash doesn't have to be gone for the child to no longer be able to spread the infection. It takes about 5 days after the appearance of the rash. And another clinical finding you may find is you may look in the mouth and see some little white spots in the cheeks, on the inside of the cheeks, which are called Koplik spots. Could we go to the next picture? So here's a picture of a typical measles rash. This would have started on the face and then progressed to the torso and the limbs. And again, the child would be infectious from when the coughing started, about 4 days, 5 days prior, until 4 or 5 days after the rash had first appeared. Can we go to the next slide? These are a picture of those little Koplik spots in the mouth. And the next slide. Now, this is a really important graph to look at to help us understand where we are in history and where we are with infectious diseases. And this is looking from the 1900s into the 1960s at several infectious diseases mortality rates. And if you look, the green one, which you see in 1900, measles had a fatality rate of about 12 or 13 out of 100,000. I mean, not a really huge death rate, but something significant. Now, as you proceed through the 1900s and as you bring in things like modern septic, clean water supply, sanitation, hygiene, refrigeration, what you see is kind of all the diseases were going away in terms of mortality. And in fact, in the case of measles, you can see at the very end, after the measles death is resolved by 98%, that's when the measles vaccine was introduced. So when we think about what got rid of dying of measles, well, 98% wasn't the vaccine. Maybe some of that 2% was. We don't know. That'll be something to look into. Could we go to the next slide? Basic principle of medicine is first do no harm. And you have to think of that when you're thinking about applying a therapy to an entire population, such as vaccination. So in terms of measles, measles has been a childhood infection with humanity for a long time. It generally occurs in childhood. It renders lifelong immunity. You're immune for life. And that's different from the vaccine, because vaccine creates immunity which is partial and which wanes about 10% per year. So essentially it's all gone in about a decade from the last injection. We have to remember that sanitation, clean water, hygiene, and good nutrition eliminated more than 98% of the rare fatalities. And then to think further there are treatments that work. So for those very rare individuals who may get seriously ill despite these other factors, there are things we can do. And so that allows us, I think, to really consider doing no harm to the majority of the population, keeping clean, healthy lifestyles, and then having treatments that my colleagues will dive into that can be applied to people who are sick. And if we could look at one last slide before I hand over the mic, let's just remember, what are the foundations of immune system health? And New Start is a great mnemonic. If you're ever thinking, am I taking good care of my immune system? Just check yourself. New Start. Nutrition, exercise, water, sunshine and vitamin D, temperance, as in healthy habits, fresh air, rest, and trust or spiritual health. Those are the true fundamentals of immune system health. So with that little introduction to what is measles, I'd like to hand back over to you, Tess, to start a broader conversation with much more details. Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Tess. There we go.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you, Mark. In 2023, World Council for Health had issued a statement cautioning parents against childhood vaccination, and it was all childhood vaccinations because there was this mounting evidence from independent scientists and a huge amount of evidence from parents' experiences to suggest that all childhood vaccines, and certainly the cumulative effect of all of them, was perhaps not as safe as we had been led to believe, and so we felt that really more research needs to be done to look at all of that, and in the meantime, everything should be halted. Certainly and that included the COVID vaccines. So I'm really interested to hear from the panel here what their perspective is on the MMR vaccine, or even the measles vaccine on its own, and whether there is a role for it in the in vaccinating children now and in this crisis that is being publicized in America about measles. Jack, would you like to jump in first?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm Dr. James Lyons-Weiler. I founded IPAC, the Institute for Pure and Applied Knowledge. It's an independent research institute, and to educate the public and allow them to empower themselves, we also created ipac-edu.org, where you can take advanced courses. It's funny when people ask me what I think, professionally or personally, about the MMR vaccine. I have to tell them I really don't know what we can think, because there's been such a campaign of misinformation and disinformation about the safety of vaccines in general, but about the MMR in particular. I could say, since the question was not just about the measles component, that there's very strong evidence that the mumps portion of the MMR vaccine itself is undergoing waning immunogenicity, that is. It's becoming ineffective or experiencing vaccine failure faster than the measles part. And this is evidenced by the outbreak of mumps in fully vaccinated, up-to-date populations, which to new generations, they're going to argue, well, that's what we have boosters for. But if you have to boost from a vaccine when you don't have to boost from a natural infection, then obviously you have waning immunity. However, if you have an entirely up-to-date, say, recently vaccinated population, and then the entire school comes down with the mumps, or it spreads through the population to the point where they have to shut down the entire school, this is a problem. I don't know if people remember this, but they had to actually quarantine for months for a U.S. Navy ship for months and months. They actually don't like to talk about that anymore. So when we have the question, can the measles vaccine play a role in, keeping measles at bay? Please understand that no vaccine stops an infection. You can still get an infection, you just might not have very efficient or effective replication. In fact, you have to have some introduction for your immune system to work. The question is whether the vaccine will reduce the severity of the symptoms in most people who get it at a rate that will reduce the mortality and reduce the morbidity to the point where the balance of benefit to risk actually weighs in favor of whole population vaccination. Now, just about the vaccine, that's one question. If it comes to mandates, then that's actually a different benefit risk equation. Should we vaccinate everyone? And we know that some people can't tolerate specific individual vaccines or vaccines in general. So, yeah, if I had to say that is there a role for it? Well, in fact, there is a role. Given the history of what public health has been doing, most children in the United States are vaccinated, and in many other countries as well. And then when we see emergence or breakthrough infections, they're not really talked about either. Something like 21% of the cases in the Disneyland outbreak many years ago, 2018 or so, were vaccine type that in some of the literature were referred to as measles-like rashes. In the official counts, it seems like they were using them initially as part of their propaganda campaign to say, oh my gosh, this thing's taking off. But please understand the epidemiology, the natural history, I should say, of measles is prior to the vaccine, it cycled throughout, the human population and with peaks every 2 to 3 years. And once you were infected with the measles virus, you've had, as far as we know, lifetime immunity. Now it seems I see a pattern in the data where it looks like we're looking at 3 to 4 year cycles, and they're getting larger. The science that I'm familiar with tells me that outbreaks of measles in very, very highly vaccinated populations are just baked into the math. It's just part of baked into the dynamics of measles natural history. Even in a vaccinated population. Why? Well, because it's only 4 to 5% of people who are vaccinated. We're told that year after recent exposure to vaccination are not immune. They don't have a seroconversion that's sufficient to stop them from having symptomatic measles. And it's also worth considering, and practically no one talks about this, certainly not mainstream media, and definitely not the doctors who are trying to convince everyone that vaccine is the only way to go with this. We do have subclinical measles cases all the time. There's literature, an older literature, especially from Japanese scientists, that were actually celebrating the fact that subclinical measles means that everybody who had a detectable infection that led to increased antibody against a circulating type of the measles during an outbreak received a booster in their immunity. So it's natural infection-based boosting. So it's a complex situation. It's extremely complex because vaccination using the MMR has actually shifted the age distribution of individuals who are at risk. When natural measles cases were found in the human population prior to vaccination, the average age was, 3 or 4 years of age. And because everyone else was immune prior to that, and because the younger kids were immune due to passive immunity from maternal antibodies, the only risk really existed in that age group, 3 to 4 years. And so where there were problems, that was probably due to the toxicity of measles proteins, I would dare say, not necessarily the measles virus. And so if you attenuate the measles, ironically, and keep most of the same proteins in there with their antigenicity, it seems to me that the same types of people that would be sensitive to measles infection would be sensitive to the measles portion of the MMR. So now we have a very young population where the vaccinated mothers are not conferring passive immunity to the child. The mom, I just learned that the mom of the young lady who died in the Mennonite family down in Texas, she said that she did receive the MMR when she was young. So she does not have the benefit of boosted immunity from subclinical measles so far as we know. She doesn't confer natural immunity-based maternal antibodies to breastfeeding to the children. Yeah, so she is I think a vaccinated mother, and the young are very, very much at risk, and then the older people are very much at risk because as their vaccine immunity wanes. I should say in maternal antibodies, the durability and the strength of the protection from vaccine passive immunity through maternal antibodies through breast milk is far less than that of natural immunity. So, yeah.
Thanks very much, Jack. I think it's really interesting, but what strikes me is there's a kind of a mistrust in our natural ability to heal. It seems with vaccinations, because we are we're part of nature. We're and as Mark showed, our immunity is based on really everything that is in our natural environment, and including nutrition. And one just wonders, and also he showed that the rates of measles were declining actually through sanitation and hygiene. So it really does seem that we're kind of putting the cart before the horse or something with this, and there's an assumption that vaccination is good, and I think that maybe that assumption is something we need to address, because it feels like an artificial assumption, because there are natural ways of being healthy, and our bodies are designed to naturally be healthy. And if one just thinks about the root cause of dis-ease, it's because there's a deficiency of something or an overwhelm of something, and those things synergistically create disease. So, so there's a lot. I know I've just said a lot, and I want to hear from the others. But before we go any further, I want to know: did anyone in this panel get measles as a child? Has anyone ever had measles? I had measles. Anyone else have measles? Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 6 out of 7 people had measles here. So that's quite a lot, and I don't recall it in horror or anything. Everyone had it. We all had. My sisters had it as well, and German measles too, chicken pox, you name it. We're pretty robust, I would say, and we're all here. So I think it is important to realize that we all existed before, there was natural health before the pharmaceutical industry came along, and before vaccines. And I think the big question is, are vaccines needed in general, in addition to this MMR measles crisis? So Ted, I'd like to hand over to you. What do you think? And the others, please do chip in.
Well, thanks for inviting me to this conversation. For those that I haven't met yet, my name is Ted Kuntz, and I'm the president of Vaccine Choice Canada. We've been around since 1982. I'm also chair of the National Citizens Inquiry, where we look at these issues. And the last question that we asked in our hearings, even just a couple of weeks ago, is, are our children safe? First of all, I want to just say, I think it was important that Dr. Trozzi outlined what measles is, because many people actually don't know what measles is. And the fear-mongering has people terrified of measles, such that we think that any case of measles, is cause for concern, and it's not. It was a routine childhood condition that there was actually benefit to it. It was part of the maturing of the immune system. And so I think one of the questions that's not being asked is, what are the consequences of actually vaccinating our children? And I would suggest that it actually disrupts the natural immune response and weakens it, such that our children are sicker than healthier. And the data would suggest that the rate of chronic illness in the world today, I think in America, they talk about it being 60% of our children today have a chronic disease condition. I mean, I think that's a serious concern. What I find with the medical industry is that they exaggerate the risk of measles, and they exaggerate the benefit of the vaccine. And so we're not being given good information. The other issue is that the vaccine hasn't actually been proven to be safe when tested against a true placebo. So we're not actually having an honest conversation. We're dealing with a mass amount of propaganda. And probably the propaganda that I'm most concerned about is that they suggest that even one measles death is unacceptable. And what's implied is that if everybody vaccinated, there would be no measles death. And that's not true. And if you look at the VAERS data, let me just share with you the VAERS data as of June the 28th, 2024. There are 113,740 reports to the VAERS reporting system of adverse events, hospitalizations, and deaths following measles vaccination. And of those numbers, 563 deaths. So we need to understand that there's actually a substantial risk to the measles vaccine that's not being acknowledged in the conversations that's happening around the world today.
Yeah, that is very true. And Mark Brody, Dr. Brody, you're a homeopath, an integrative practitioner. What is your view on vaccination?
Oh, you're muted. Just waiting for you to unmute, Dr. Brody.
There.
There you are. Now you're clear. Oh, you were.
There. Okay. So I think I'd like to steal a page from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who advised the people of Texas in considering what to do about protecting their child from measles in view of the recent outbreak. He said, consult with your primary care physician. Because as Ted was saying, we don't have a complete database. We don't know what the best treatment for measles is because we haven't done comparative studies. The public health officials and the media presents a single solution, which is get the vaccination. But is that better or worse than doing nothing or some of the alternatives? I'm going to discuss some of the alternatives. Some of the alternatives, we can pretty much say that the safety of them has been well established. The efficacy one can challenge because we don't have double-blind placebo-controlled studies. But these natural treatments, which I use in my practice, I've had some success with clinically, and practitioners of homeopathy and herbal medicine and other types of alternative medicines have been using these for hundreds of years with many reported clinical successes and almost zero adverse effects. So we can feel very comfortable when resorting to these alternative treatments that we're going to get a safe product for our child. Its efficacy is somewhat in dispute, but so is that of MMR. So that's why we have to take a measured view of it in consultation with experts. I'm going to first speak about some of the homeopathic treatments that I've used and that I think would be appropriate for consideration. And I'll just say in homeopathic treatment, we're always treating the person based on the unique situation and the unique symptoms that they present with. So the first remedy that I would think of is aconite, because aconite is a remedy par excellence for the early stages of any febrile disease or infectious disease. Usually the onset is very swift. The action of the remedy expires within 24 hours. So if the child or individual has been sick for more than 24 hours, aconite's off the table. But during that first 24 hours, it can have a marked ameliorative effect on both fever, rash, and other symptoms. So I would always recommend these potencies in the 30C potency. If you're using them yourself, they're available in health food stores everywhere. The other remedy that is a very big remedy for the acute phases of measles is pulsatilla, which is a remedy for a certain type of person. And this person is usually very moody, weepy, clingy, and their symptoms often move from one place to another. We call this migratory or metastatic kind of symptoms. And if your child fits this personality profile when they are sick, then they are likely to do quite well with pulsatilla. It's one of the best remedies for measles based on clinical experience of over 200 years. The other is called morbillinum, which is basically what we call a homeopathic nosode, or a preparation of the measles virus in homeopathic form, so diluted out by trillions and trillions of times. And this is useful primarily for prophylaxis. This and pulsatilla are probably the two best prophylactic homeopathic remedies. A few other ones that I would also consider would be euphrasia. Euphrasia is useful when there are a lot of, it's eyebright is the herb that it's made from. When the nasal symptoms and the eye symptoms are very prominent, a lot of runny nose, sneezing, watery eyes, itchy eyes, euphrasia would be very useful in that situation. Sulfur is useful when there's a very bright red rash, a lot of itching, and a lot of heat. So there might be a high fever. The person feels very hot. They don't want to be covered, and the rash is quite itchy. Bryonia is a remedy when the cough is quite prominent, and often that cough can be painful. Bryonia is one of the main remedies for painful cough. The child is irritable. They want to be left alone, and they often have a big thirst, and they drink in big drafts of water. So anyway, this just gives you an idea. And you say, well, how do I compare that to the measles vaccine? The answer is, well, you're not going to lose anything with trying the homeopathic remedies. If the child isn't doing well with your homeopathic treatment, you could always seek further interventions with, I wouldn't choose vaccinating as an acute intervention. It makes sense only in prophylaxis, but I might consider budesonide or high levels of vitamin D, which are far safer, or vitamin D and A, which you can get in cod liver oil. I'll just very briefly mention that I've had a couple of patients who I've treated with homeoprophylaxis. One was a couple who would travel to Kenya every year, which was where malaria is endemic. And every year I prophylaxed them against malaria with homeopathy. Every year they came back saying they didn't catch it. They didn't want to take Lariam, which is known for causing psychosis. It's the main prophylaxis. And so, did it work, or were they just lucky? I don't know, but it's appeared to have. They were happy with the treatment. And then I've had a number of other cases of people who were concerned about taking the flu vaccine, and I gave them the homeopathic remedy influenzinum. And I've never had anybody who took it get influenza. Now, maybe I'm lucky, but that's a pretty good track record. So, and I've never had anybody have any side effect to any of these remedies.
Thank you so much, Mark, Dr. Brody. It's really fascinating, especially my background is in allopathic medicine, so when you're speaking about homeopathic remedies, it's almost like you're speaking a different language. And I think many people have been taught or have learned, that homeopathy doesn't work and it's just, placebo or something, which is it's really funny. So I just wanted to show you this book, actually. Funny enough, this book, it's actually by somebody called Laurie, by J. Laurie, a doctor called Dr. Laurie, but spelled slightly differently to me. But it's from 1880, and it's called The Homeopathic Domestic Medicine, a very old book, older than a lot of the stuff that I was learning at medical school. So just to let people, just to remind them that, the science of homeopathy and the practice, the healing art of homeopathy and Ayurveda and all these herbal and herbal approaches are far older than our modern medicine. And really, it's a time for us to reflect and take the best from it and recognize that they are certainly part of the art of healing. So thank you very much for highlighting that, Mark.
You're welcome.
I'd like to hear from Dr. Willer. She's been very quiet so far, but we know that she has a lot to say about the MMR vaccine and her thoughts on measles in the USA. So go ahead, Dr. Willer.
Hi, Des. Thank you for having me today. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm from Florida. I'm the uh, little leader here in WCH Florida, but I've been working with a lot of you guys, especially with Mark Trozzi, and it's gonna start with Mark Brody. We just have to make a little time. So basically, with this, obviously, I'm not a pediatrician, but I deal with respiratory diseases because that's my specialty. I'm a pulmonologist, and the mode of entry of measles is through the respiratory tract, right? And it goes into the respiratory tract. You get it by droplet, your saliva, and all, and it really goes into the respiratory tract. And we dread about getting the pneumonia, which is a real, you know, danger, especially if you're vitamin A deficient, because the vitamin A is actually very good in building up your innate immune system or the mucosa of your respiratory tract. And when you have a healthy respiratory tract, you can get rid of the measles very quickly. Now, but that's not my main concern because right now, Mark T is very familiar with what I'm doing right now because of the massive or widespread intervention of the COVID pandemic. We were given the COVID vaccine, and even though, there are some, what do you call this, uh, published papers already on autoimmune and some effect on the immune system. And I just would like to share my personal experience that the effect of this vaccine is actually lower. It lowers the your immune system significantly, both especially the CD8 and the CD4. And when you think about the measles, how you can fight that effectively and how you can clear the virus in your system faster, it is the function of the CD8. And that is the part of your immune system that is crippled when you get the COVID vaccine. Even if it's not official yet, but it's the pattern that I see in all my patients. And fortunately, I have so many of them. We actually just discussed my statistic. And so that's my main concern. You have to remember measles, the first thing that you have to think about is it will only be effective if you have an intact immune system. And it's not just measles, but other vaccine in general. They will work if your immune system is strong and intact, because the idea is you will produce antibodies that will fight the infection when you get exposed. But how are you going to do that if to begin with your immune system is already low? And so that's even the contraindication of giving the measles vaccine. If you're immunocompromised, if you're immunosuppressed, of course, there are different levels of immunosuppression. People with cancer are immunosuppressed, immunodepressed. People on chronic medication, like what? People on immunosuppressant or steroids, or they're just born with some immune disorder um, that are, genetically determined. So these people cannot get the vaccine, the measles vaccine, because it's a live attenuated form of vaccine. And so if you get that as an immunosuppressed individual, you're going to get the disease and you really are going to have a bad time. You can die from that. And so that is my concern. Like, let's say, for example, measles is always there. It hasn't gone away, just like what they projected because of the vaccine. It's gone. No, that's a lie. I think that's why we have outbreaks from here and there. And so, what I am concerned about as well, also, like what Ted said, with one death, they are trying to do a mass vaccination. It's almost like predictable what they are trying to think. I hope I'm wrong, but that's we have that experience, you know. I mean, it's supposed to be protecting with the COVID the old people, and now we even know that the old people, the senior, were the most vulnerable to COVID, but they're also the first one vulnerable to the treatment. And so we have to think a little bit. This mass vaccination gimmick should not be allowed at any time. For me, I am talking that way, especially in the face of the massive COVID or widespread massive COVID vaccination. And so we actually have to think about how we can strengthen our immune system, because it goes back to that. Whether it's your nutrition, whether it's your vitamin A, whether it's your herbal preparation, what is it really doing to us? It is strengthening your immune system. So that's the best thing. The question is, how can we help these people with lower immune system? 2/3 of the world population got inoculated by that intervention. And so it's not only the measles that we have to worry about, but other common infection, common diseases. And there's so many other viruses also that if you get before the measles, it's going to immune suppress you. What's the most common one? The herpes viruses. If it enters your body, your immune system is going to go down. And so it's not just the measles that we have to worry about. Actually, compared to the other ones, the measles really is very mild disease if you have good immune system. So the focus for me is to strengthen the immune system and go from there, because you have strong immune system, innate, and then the adaptive one, T cells. You'll do fine. So we have to really address all the COVID vaccinated people, because it's not just going to be the children, it's also the old people or the adults, because the effect of this COVID vaccine is immune suppression. Probably in different degrees, but that's what I have to say.
Thanks very much for that reality check, Marivic. I think that is the greatest concern for us is the health of those who have received the COVID vaccines, because as you say, their immune systems are most likely suppressed, and certainly your data is showing that, and we hope to present that paper of yours based on your clinical practice experience in the next weeks and months. But I think that is a concern. I think there's obviously two things that need to be addressed. The one is is measles danger for those who have robust immune systems? And the answer to that is no. I think we've heard that from you and others. Is it a concern for those who have damaged immune systems? Potentially, yes. And we need to help to support people to be vaccinated, to really optimize, who've been COVID vaccinated, to optimize their immune systems so that they are more robust and able to, shrug off whatever they might be exposed to and maintain good health. The only person who hasn't said anything in this particular segment, because we have a little advert we're going to show soon, is Francesca Havens, who's our nutritional. You'll have to tell us, Francesca. I can never get that right. It's such a long word.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here having this discussion with all of you. I'm a nutritional therapist and a clinical psychoneuroimmunologist, which means looking at the link between the impact of the mind and the body on the mind, and through science rather than through hearsay. And I just had a couple of slides which Mark might bring up. It's very quick, just to look at some herbs. So like already has been referred to, There are many old solutions to conditions like the measles. Measles was first described, I think, well, centuries ago, and it's been described in literature 2,500 years ago. And so, as we can imagine, with ancient herbal remedies, we have in every culture around the world, people have been using herbal medicines, whether it's in the Americas, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in India with Ayurveda, etc., etc. So we know we've co-evolved with nature, as Tess mentioned earlier on, and so there are all these remedies that have been used knowingly for centuries and even for millennia to deal with different aspects of what a measles infection might look like, which Dr. Trozzi already explained. And so we have herbs like the American Solomon seal or annatto, which are antipyretic. In other words, they bring down fever. And annatto is also immunostimulant. In other words, it's going to support the immune system to resist different aspects of the measles infection. You also have bee balm, which is brings down the fever. And then you have various potent antivirals like grapefruit seed extract, which counters most organisms. And as a side note, if you go anywhere doubtful on holiday and you take grapefruit seed extract and put 20 to 40 drops in a glass of water at the first onset of any gastric discomfort, you will be well by the next day. And a friend I recently gave that advice to, as I have done over many, many years, was recovered within 24 hours of a slight onset of something in India. And so then you have Dyer's woad, which is again a powerful antiviral, and it inhibits viral replication, which is what grapefruit seed extract does. It inhibits an antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal. Chinese skullcap is particularly observed when there's fear for inflammation in the brain. Now, this is a very, very exceptional condition that people can develop if they get measles and they're immune suppressed, and therefore this kind of situation can arise, and it also reduces the cytokine cascade, that is the inflammatory cascade. Elderberry is many people are actually familiar with, or most of the plant is used in a tincture, and it inhibits enveloped viruses, which is what measles is. It's an enveloped virus. Then you have licorice, which is a well-known, again, antiviral, stops replication, and it helps antibody formation, which is always useful. And it's often combined with skullcap in the case of a measles infection, and any herbalist can help with this kind of program. Then you have yarrow, which brings down fevers, cleavers or sticky grass that children like to play with by sticking it on their mum's clothing as a tincture or a tea, is also good for bringing down fever and for the itching. And then we have kudzu, which is shown to shorten the length of the illness, used traditionally as well. Next slide, please, Mark. And so there are many other treatments that are associated with holistic medicine, like bee propolis, which is a very broad antiviral and excellent for all sorts of things, including coughs and itching throats. And inhalations of iodine. This even is apparent in Merck's manual of 1899 for post-measles cough. Dr. Mark Brody's already gone through the different aspects of the homeopathy, so I won't do that. But what I found interesting about the homeopathic remedies is that the morbillinum is actually recommended in homeopathy to be given to a child who has measles, having been vaccinated for measles. So that's a rather interesting side line. And then, of course, you have the itching. You know, if you have a child with measles, it's very uncomfortable for them, the same as with chicken pox or any one of these childhood illnesses. And you can use mud packs, you can use oatmeal in the bath, and that creates a remedy that actually softens the skin and reduces the itching. And it brings down the fever as well, to have a little bath for the child. And calamine lotion is something that many people have used regularly in their families for any kind of itching and spots and bumps and boils. Barley water has been used for cough, and that's used actually in Africa. It's a common Ayurvedic remedy for the measles cough is barley water. I think it's called jai in Hindu. And then we have chlorine dioxide solution, which is a powerful antiviral and gives immune support by supplying plentiful oxygen for the immune system to do its business. And then, of course, we have the good old vitamins, D, A, C, and E in topical application, which helps prevent scarring. That's particularly in the case of, let's say, chicken pox. And all the general health things, the diet, the exercise, the fasting. Children naturally don't want to eat when they're not well, and they shouldn't be encouraged or forced to eat something just because the parents worried about it. We naturally fast when we're not well. And I have to say that I never, ever obliged my son to eat when he wasn't well. I let him decide, because no child will starve itself. All children know when to eat, because they haven't lost their natural instincts, especially when they're quite small. Cod liver oil has already been mentioned by Dr. Brody for the high retinol. An easy way to get the vitamin A or retinol into the system to support the body. And we used to give it to our children 40, 50 years ago. They'd get a spoonful a week and queue up, depending how many children you had. And of course, there's the breastfeeding, because you can communicate health-giving immunoglobulins and lactoferrin if you're still breastfeeding, a slightly older toddler, and that's very helpful for them too. And last slide, I think there's, oh yes, and there's one thing I did want to mention, because in psychoneuroimmunology, we look at why do we have these different diseases and what do they mean? And what is our ancient, what is the cycle that we're locked in with them? Because we grew with nature and we resolved issues symbiotically with nature. And so many academics have actually looked into this matter regarding childhood illnesses. And although there's not masses of literature, but there is some literature, and it has been shown and discussed in more recent years, certainly in the last 20 years or so, the fact that children who have had their childhood illnesses, in other words, they haven't been vaccinated, they've had the good old measles, mumps, rubella, etc., they have a lower likelihood of different kinds of cancer in later life. And this is a really important thing to take into account, because we did evolve with nature. And so we can't just dismiss everything that happens to us. And there's much we don't understand and much we still have to look into. But certainly the science is showing that these are important facets of childhood illnesses. And so there's a bunch of studies there about febrile diseases and cancer. There's Mumps, an immune protection. It's been shown to provide protection against ovarian cancer later in life. If you have your childhood diseases later on, as more and more people have been getting vaccinated, so less and less children get a natural bout of one of these childhood illnesses, well, then it's been shown that there's a higher incidence, for instance, of multiple sclerosis in populations who've had these diseases later, as maybe in their teens instead of as small children, as we were discussing earlier. So there's a study into chickenpox, which has been shown to having chickenpox as a young child, not as a vaccine, a natural infection, leads to reduced glioma risk. Now, the incidences of glioma are skyrocketing in populations around the world, and certainly in developed countries where people are more vaccinated. And then there's been links shown in various studies between having measles as a child and reduced likelihood of getting non-Hodgkin's lymphoma as an adult. And also there is another sign that having measles and mumps later, so let's say as a 10-year-old or as a teenager, is associated with a higher incidence of non-Hodgkin. So there's definitely something very special about childhood illnesses that provide protection because they help us to develop our immune system and build very powerful immune systems, taking into account, of course, that you encourage your children to play outdoors, to spend time in the sun, to engage in a lot of physical activity, as children always used to do. They'd be out in the street playing from dawn till dusk, and eat healthy diets of home cooked and homegrown food, etc., etc. So I'll stop there. Sorry if I've taken too much time.
Thanks so much, Francesca. It's really fascinating to see this, that there's so many different herbs and things. And I hope people watching aren't thinking that, they need to get all of those things in order to recover from measles. It just shows the wealth of nature's apothecary, and how, depending on where you are, what part of the world, and what you can get your hands on, or who your health practitioner is, who the trusted health practitioner is, there's a whole range of things that you can do to ameliorate the symptoms of measles, both orally and topically, for the skin rash and the conjunctivitis and so on. So it's really, we need to not be afraid of these sorts of illnesses, and remember, that in not so long ago, people were, we did, share these little diseases by having parties and that sort of thing. If you were sick, you'd go over to your friend's house and they'd get it too, because the benefit of childhood diseases, there was a value to it, as Francesca has pointed out. The earlier one, if one gets childhood diseases, one's less likely to get more severe sort of infection as an adult, or even, as Francesca has pointed out, there's evidence to show that it might even reduce your risk of other sorts of cancers or chronic diseases. So that was really, really interesting. Thank you, Francesca, for raising that. So we'd like to give you a quick little advert about our detox study, so that people watching are aware, and I'll just ask our tech team to put that on for us while we take a break. Thank you.
Are you ready to take control of your health and well-being? If you are not feeling yourself, or know someone else who isn't, then the World Council for Health invites you to join our groundbreaking study on detox and well-being. This comprehensive study offers you science-backed insights on the benefits of detoxing, cleansing your body, boosting your energy, and optimizing your health. All you need to do to participate is 1. download our Detox and Wellbeing Guide. 2. Select one of the expert international detox protocols. 3. Report back on your progress once weekly for 8 weeks. And that's it. Our friendly team will accompany you on your detox journey. Your participation will help you and others, as your valuable feedback will identify which of our protocols are the most effective. Now is the time to take back control of your health and well-being. So sign up and recommend this vital study to your family and friends. Together with the support of the World Council for Health and the Control Group, we can create a better way for a better world.
So that's really to inspire people who have been COVID vaccinated to think about how they can optimize their immune system. And in the detox and well-being guide that is comprised of different detox protocols from our different country councils around the world, you're likely to find something in there that would suit you and which you can use to optimize your immune system to protect you from or to get rid of the spike protein, because we know that spike protein is causing a lot of the challenges for one's immune system, and to optimize, make sure that you have everything else you need to stay healthy. So I think at this time I'd like to just invite everybody to say what they haven't said that they feel is really important in relation to measles and MMR. And let's start with Mark Trozzi, because he's been patient.
Well, thanks so much, Tess. And boy, I wish I had 10 hours with this group, because I could learn so much from everybody. When I think of my own grandchildren and therefore my own advice for my own family, I think it's very clear that I will not be recommending vaccination, measles vaccines or others, for a variety of reasons that we've gone into for quite a while. I think that, it's interesting when you look at the history, and again, you see that measles deaths was mostly eliminated by plumbing and refrigeration and nutrition. And when you look at who were the rare people that get really sick or maybe die from measles, very rare. It would be young infants in the environment of malnourishment, of malnutrition, of hunger, and also perhaps very old and frail people. So I think it's very important that we continue to use modern septic. I don't think anyone's thinking about getting rid of that. Continue to use your toilets, continue to wash your hands, continue to practice hygiene. Eat a really robust, healthy diet, especially make sure, pregnant women, breastfeeding mothers have a robust diet. Vitamin A is not hard to get. It's in a lot of foods. So it's very unusual for someone to be deficient in vitamin A unless they're basically deficient across the spectrum and they're malnourished. Something that came up beautiful in our conversation the other day that I was struck by, and it was Dr. Brody that brought it up, was, when you look at vitamin A, like vitamin D, vitamin A has to be activated to become retinol to have the acute ability to boost the immunity. So if someone has good vitamin A in their diet all the time, like most of us do, really not an issue. But when someone is acutely ill and you're concerned that this child may be malnourished, this child may be vitamin A deficient, it's amazing how cod liver oil turns out to be a source of vitamin A that's already been converted to retinol. So you already have the active form. This is something we know with vitamin D. In some countries, you can get hydroxylated vitamin D3, which is vitamin D after your liver's activated. Not available in a lot of countries, strangely, though you can get toxic genetic experiments. But in some countries, you can get activated vitamin D. And that's another great rescue medicine. And then I think another thing that stands out for me is, just as plumbing and refrigeration changed the world of infectious diseases and reduced the mortality of so many diseases to a tiny fraction of what it was, long before the vaccine industry came in and took credit for it, which obviously doesn't deserve the credit because history didn't happen that way. Well, unfortunately, we're at a point now where the vaccine industry has performed this genetic experiment that Dr. Villa pointed out, and that now we do have major challenges to the immune system. And And we may see that we need to be more aggressive in treating measles in some categories, particularly people whose immune system has been damaged by the COVID-19 genetic shots. I don't think we should look, personally, and I know from my family, we will not be looking to the vaccine industry to solve that. We'll be looking for other ways to deal with that. And the last thing I just want to say, and it stands out from a conversation I was lucky to have with James Lyons-Weiler the other day, to first do no harm would involve, not doing things to people that aren't sick. And so rather than taking an approach of what can we do to every single child and human on the planet to reduce the minuscule risk of measles, what can we do to the rare people that get sick with measles so that we can help them, so that, that 1 in 100,000 deaths can be reduced to 0 in 100,000. So those are just some of my thoughts coming away, and I'd love to hear what others are thinking.
Well, could I ask a question of Ted, actually? I'd like to ask Ted a question, because all of this, heavy vaccination business, and we know the incidence of vaccinations for very young children has gone up hugely.
Mm-hmm.
I was really interested to hear during the 2020, when there was no vaccines and people were locked down, it was actually rather interesting because parents were not actually going to their GPs to vaccinate their children because of the lockdowns, etc., etc. And this pointed to one of the things, and I don't know whether you can confirm this with me, that the incidence of SIDS, or sudden infant death syndrome, suddenly and mysteriously went down in the same period. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, that's my understanding as well, is that during that period when people were staying away from hospitals and doctors, and the vaccination rate was reduced, that the SIDS rate did go down. Maybe Dr. James Lyons-Weiler has better numbers on exactly what that was. But I think that's really important information for us to pay attention to. The vaccines are constantly being presented as all benefit and no risk. And I actually think the risk-benefit ratio is the other way around, is that there's a higher risk. I'm more afraid of the measles vaccine, for example, than I am of measles. But that's not the messaging that's going out there to the public. And so I think we've been deceived, we've been manipulated, we've been fear-mongered to a degree that we place all kinds of trust in something that actually doesn't deserve our trust.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ted. We published an analysis by Mark Blaxell, and it's a substantial feature. I also happen to have found in the literature, when I was writing my book, The Environmental and Genetic Causes of Autism, that one of the risk factors of having autism was easy access to medical care for children. So how your proximity to the pediatrician's office, you really can't make this up. We talked a lot today about the immunocompromised and immunosuppression. And I also mentioned earlier that, I'm not, I don't think we should approach infectious disease with fear under any circumstances. I think, as a fairly advanced civilization with a lot of distributed knowledge, when we bring together things like the knowledge brought together here by Mark Brody and Francesca, and what kinds of combined therapies and treatments might be most effective, I think we're just a few years away from understanding exactly how to never have a measles death. We don't want to have to eradicate measles, but we can eradicate measles deaths. So one of the things that I want to say in terms of the Make America Healthy Again initiative in the United States, which really should catch on worldwide, not any particular organization, but the concept, is that if you increase baseline health through adequate vitamin D and others supplements and vitamins like A and so on, your risk of all-cause mortality has to go down. I mean, it has to go down. One of the indices that we've measured, we've learned to measure and pay much close attention to, is all-cause mortality. It started with Peter Ube and his group, who looked at what happened when you had a pertussis vaccination program over 10 years in a population that had never seen it before, a virgin soil population, and their all-cause mortality in those children went up, and there were differences between genders, and so there's something there, right? But we talked a lot about immunocompromise, and I think tomorrow on my Substack Popular Rationalism, I'll be calling for finally an end to thimerosal in influenza vaccines in the United States. And if we stop making them here and using them, hopefully it will cascade. And it's all based on science. There are 8 studies in particular. There's of course the study that showed that if you get an inactivated influenza vaccine, you have an increased risk of non-influenza respiratory viruses. That was done published in 2012 by Ben Colling. And I just found in 2021 a study in the Netherlands looking at population level numbers of 2007 to 2016, that individuals who had vaccinees go to their doctors more for clinically diagnosed. People who vaccinate go to their doctors more for clinically diagnosed influenza, acute respiratory infection, and pneumonia, more so than non-vaccinees. And this is a 24 to 33% higher GP consultation rate for those conditions, right? They're complaining to their doctors more that they're sicker, which sounds familiar. And then another study, outcomes of COVID-19 infection in people previously vaccinated against influenza, found that there's a statistically higher risk of experiencing adverse outcomes following a COVID-19 infection, if you just had a flu vaccine recently. I'm not going to go through all the studies, but the problem is we already know that thimerosal causes immunocompromise. We absolutely, the same way that we know the spike protein does it. We know this. And so, and when you look at, say, vaccinated versus unvaccinated, one of the things that you have to be concerned with is how much of this is due to the immunocompromise. How much of the worst health outcome in the vaccinated population is just due to influenza vaccination with thimerosal, at least in the United States data. 60%, I think about that, 60% of flu vaccines contain thimerosal. And so, when we take the initiative and we say, let's first do no harm, it goes right to how we formulate vaccines, not just if you vaccinate. It goes right to that. And so, I'm not saying that I think that we can save the world by making vaccines safer, but I am saying, hey, doctor, it hurts when I do this. Well, don't do that, right? If there are people who want vaccines after COVID-19, more power to them. Go for it. But please, if you're going to vaccinate, please petition your government, because now's the time to make sure that they're as safe as possible. These are your children, your grandchildren, your family members. We have the epidemiology of increased respiratory viral infections if they get influenza vaccines. Do you want increased respiratory virus? Haven't we had enough of influenza-like illness? Haven't we had enough of respiratory viral illness in America and around the world that we need a 1.6 times increase in any respiratory viral illness if you vaccinate against the flu? So if COVID-19 vaccines doing it and influenza vaccines, it's starting to look to me that vaccines might be a gateway drug to other conditions by which the pharmaceutical company then can come out and say, hey, we have something for that. So, cause the problem and solve the solution. And that's why people on the Hill, congressmen and senators in the United States of America, they can't talk about this, right? So we really have this unique opportunity over the next few years to have these very difficult discussions, the kind that Ted was calling for. And this idea, remember that William Thompson told Brian Hooker that, hey, you know what, the CDC decided that they're going to continue to have thimerosal in flu vaccines, but worse than that, we're going to recommend them primarily for pregnant women, so that we could boast to the world, go ahead and take our thimerosal-containing vaccines that we don't want in America, because look, we're even brave enough to inject thimerosal right into our pregnant women. I mean, the insanity of putting the economic outcomes before the health outcomes has to come to a screeching halt. And just those simple things are very simple. Stop exposing people to immunocompromising agents, and you'll have less immunocompromise, and you'll have fewer severe cases of measles. The last thing I wanted to mention was there seems to be some evidence that the measles virus, in the way of its life history within our bodies, does do something to vitamin A levels. And so, it might be that it might not take severe nutrition deficiency. It might take that you're just, got normal levels of vitamin A, and you can undergo vitamin A depletion through measles infection. And so if that's the case, listen to grandma, take your vitamins. What can I say?
Thanks, Jack. That is, such an important point, especially the do no harm, because certainly as a mother who's taken 4 babies to be vaccinated with needles, this is my mother role, not my doctor role. When I think back on that, I think actually needles in themselves are very harmful intervention for a beautiful, healthy baby. Bouncing baby, to go and stick needles into it it seems to me now more akin to voodoo than anything else. So it seems to be a very barbaric practice, and it really doesn't seem to fit with a modern approach to medicine and health. So I actually feel that we don't have the time for the lawmakers and those who draft the bills and try and bring the pharmaceutical industry to heal, because they're so out of control with this money-making vaccine industry, that it really has to be up to the people. It's the mothers and fathers. We're the ones who've got to say, no, you don't come near my child with those needles. And it's really up to us to protect them, because we cannot wait. Babies are being born every day. Children are being injected every single day. And we really need to put a stop to it at a grassroots level, because we cannot wait for the political system to decide what is appropriate and who's going to, vote this and vote that. We cannot wait for these individuals who seem to have conflicted interests and to make the decisions for our children.
I wonder if I could just jump in with one other thought there briefly, Tess. I think it's an important caveat. Individualized healthcare is a human right, and it's actually part of the Hippocratic Oath, but it has been profoundly violated in recent years. So one of the comments that was made, and I think we were quoting RFK in this case, saying, what great advice. He said, go see your doctor, get individual advice. That should be the reality. But I think people need to be aware of a couple of factors that make that less reliable than you would like it to be. One is that, for instance, in all countries, this is true in different variation, but for instance, in the United States, if a pediatrician vaccinates the vast majority of his pediatric patients and has all of them completely up to date, there are hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash benefits paid to the pediatrician. At the same time, if a doctor has conclusions to the contraire, like Dr. Thomas, if they make observations or articulations, or in the case of COVID in Canada, if a doctor said, look at the ingredients, that's a genetic experiment, not really a vaccine. Not only did they not get hundreds of thousands of dollars in bonuses, which they could have made handing out the COVID vaccine, but they were generally stripped of their license, their income, and their positions. So very expensive to give that advice. And then to take matters even further, you will note the absence of colleagues from certain countries with us today, because to make an articulation of a thought that is not absolutely religiously in support of measles vaccination in some countries will result in the imprisonment of the doctor. The reason I bring that up is if you go to your doctor to get that one-on-one advice, it's going to be pretty hard to get it. So education is really important. That's why we host these kind of events, and we have absolutely nothing to gain. In fact, many of us have sacrificed things in order to be able to bring you this information.
I'd like to add something to that, which is that, and I think we're all. Let me take a moment to rephrase this. We all should have learned something from what's happened over the last few years about who to trust and who not to trust. And if people are hearing a message being promulgated vigorously through the media and public health officials. This may remind them of a similar situation where it didn't always turn out so well, and the facts ended up being other than what were initially broadcast. I'm going to also speak to what Dr. Trozzi said, which is that I don't actually tell people not to vaccinate. I say I would recommend you get every vaccination that has been proven to be safe and effective by randomized controlled trials that have been independently conducted and well replicated. And then they look at me with a little bit of a blank stare, and I say, well, I guess we don't really have any of those. That's what the research says. So if you want to get the vaccine, I would do it in order to donate my body to science or as a charitable contribution to the vaccine companies. If you try to work with nature and take something that is more benign and proven with hundreds of years of experience, I, as a practitioner, am liable. But any of the people who are recommending this product that goes against nature, they are completely immune from any medical legal liability. And you will be making them very wealthy and very happy. So, I try to use a little bit of a sideways attempt to persuade people to think about things. I'll just end with that. Also, I would like to add, in addition to taking James Weiler's suggestion of taking your vitamins, I'd suggest you take Tess's and Francesca's and take your vitamins too.
Thanks very much, Mark. Marivic, your last words on the matter.
You'll have to unmute.
Okay. It's not very clear to me that for us not to get sick, really, the primary requirement is to have a strong immune system. And for us to have a strong immune system, it's not the vaccine that we require. It's the nutrition, whatever we do with our body, do everything to make your immune system strong, and you allow it to interact with whatever nature gives you or the natural environment, and you're not going to have the complication, you're not going to develop the diseases that these infectious agents are doing to the very weak ones or with the immunosuppressed status. So it's not about not getting infected, because if you have a strong immune system, the infection is the best immunization or vaccination that you could ever have. And so we have to focus on what's good in nature and what's good in our body, inside your own body, and you boost them, and then focus on the treatment that don't have side effects. I mean, I'm glad that Francesca and Dr. Brody actually, mention all this treatment or remedies that they're part of nature and very easily to get, unless the big pharmaceutical companies are actually suppressing them, which we have experienced in the last 4 or 5 years, which is, no, it's going to come back. And this is not just, I think, applicable to measles, but in any infectious agents or any disease for that matter. All we have to do is just open our eyes. And yeah, you have to use discernment for the people to trust. And that, I agree with you. The politicians should stay away, and they should not be allowed to say anything when it comes to health. It should be up to us, the doctors and the patient, the practitioner. We have the decision, not them. And that's that. Stay healthy.
So true. Thanks, Vic. Francesca.
Thank you, Tess. I just noticed that someone's commented about potentially creating vaccination programs, not just for children, but also for adults in Norway, where there's not any further information on that, but it's implying that there would be no choice. And I think, as Marivic was just saying, we really do have to start thinking about what our rights are as individual men and women. You know, we have the right to decide what we do with our bodies, and we should not be living in states where there's a program that obliges people to do things like that against their will. I think it's completely crazy. And I think all of us that are gathered here tonight are here because we genuinely believe in every man and woman's right to choose what they're going to do with their bodies and their health, and choose for their families, for their children, and have that freedom of choice. So the harder we work at it, and the more people are willing to listen to these ideas and disseminate proper information about what vaccines may or may not do to health, this is what we have to keep doing. And I'm certainly going to. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you, Tess.
Yeah, that's so true. If I think about the WHO's immunization campaign, which basically claims that they're going to develop 500 vaccines by 2030, and that they are for all phases of life. In their poster, they have people of all ages. They just really clearly want to, use that as the primary approach to their One Health policy. You just inject everybody, or well, we know they're making the nasal vaccines too, aren't they? But they just want to keep on controlling people's bodies and systems. It's quite extraordinary. It completely rejects the notion of, or it's completely counter to the reality that we are part of nature. We're natural beings, and we don't need to be controlled by drug companies by injections every year. This is certainly what they are implying. So,
yeah, could I add to that? So
yes.
It's also against the natural history and the etiology of infectious disease. We do not see, billions of people getting every one of those 500 diseases. And yet when you start vaccinating, this is why I have to emphasize, we need to shift the discussion from vaccine versus injection versus infection to how many times do you want to be exposed to pathogenic proteins? How many times do you want to have an epitope that's likely to cause disease in your body? Would you like it one time and walk away with natural immunity and the risk of whatever the sequela were? Or would you like it every 2 years, every year, every 4 years, 500 different kinds of organisms? And, they're not going to succeed. I'll tell you right now, the human population will not accept 500 vaccines. It just will not happen. In Norway, it came up in a discussion. And what we're going to see is a diaspora of freedom-loving humans who decide that they would rather not live underneath the rule of the regime that's going to force them to take these, and they will relocate at all costs to get their children out of harm's way when they start seeing what's happening. And then in retrospect, historians from 20 years from now are going to look back and say, well, that was a black swan event. Anyone could have predicted that. We saw it coming when most freedom-loving people from California moved to Florida or Texas or elsewhere. And I met a family that had to relocate twice. They were medical refugees twice from California to Oregon. And then when Oregon lost their mind and decided to take away exemptions, they had to move again. And so who are the survivors going to be? The number of people who have, right? I think it's a self-correcting problem, but I don't want to see my fellow human beings go through all of that pain and suffering from hundreds, thousands of exposures to pathogenic parts of proteins from pathogens. The proteins in a virus or bacteria are the bacterium's or virus's way, the pathogen's way to successfully reproduce by making us sick, so we spread them. Come on, I mean, so yeah, I think when the people of Norway realize what they're being asked to take on, and the people who are under the World Health Organization, and hopefully, they will wake up and they will say, One Health is an easy to predict disaster, an absolute public health disaster.
Mhm. Certainly, one of the things we haven't discussed and we don't have time for, but we can save for another date, is really the role of gain of function or bioweapons research, not only research but deployment in this whole seemingly rigged game of infections and injections. So we'll leave that for another time. But what I would like to just show now is food that we can take. Food, you know, what a healthy diet involves. I'll just see if I can get this up on the stage. There we go. The recommended daily allowance, we have spoken about vitamin A, and vitamin A is something that is recommended by the World Health Organization too. Just to say that our recommended daily allowance really is easily obtainable so I don't know why my face has popped up. There we go. Is easily attainable in a really well balanced diet. So you can see how this is really a severe illness. Is really a disease of somebody who's not getting a well balanced diet, and you can see very high levels of retinoic acid equivalent in sweet potatoes, spinach, and carrots and herring and dairy products, cantaloupe and so on, and even more. Obviously, liver has always been a very high source of vitamin A, and as such, you know, it's not recommended to be eaten too often. Mangoes, even breakfast cereals are fortified, not that we recommend those. Egg and so on. So, you know, if you're eating a well-balanced diet, there's no reason why you should have a severe illness and develop pneumonia, because remember, when we're talking about disease, we're talking about the fact that it's based on nutrient deficiencies, and as Mark pointed out, if you have vitamin A deficiency, you probably have other vitamin deficiencies as well, and minerals, but also an overwhelm of other things. Stress, poor hygiene, or whatever, or a variety of things that could synergistically work to push you into a disease state. And then when we need to look at diseases as really an opportunity to notice that we actually we're out of balance, and our balance needs to be restored, and we do that through detox and supplements, and doing those healthy practices that we know are good for us, like being outside in the sunshine and getting our feet on the ground. So I would just like to thank our wonderful guests and everyone who's taken the time to share their perspective with us today and with you. And we'll play out with a song, I believe, as usual. So I think it's something about change, which is certainly on the cards for everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tess. Thanks, everyone. Hang on for a beautiful song.
Thanks for joining us in the newsroom. We really value your support. Thank you for watching this episode of Better Way Today. If you found value in it, please consider making a value exchange with us. The World Council for Health is a grassroots people's organization, and we rely on funding from people just like you. Your contributions from as little as $5 or £5 or 100 Rand help to power our work. The World Council for Health team is on a mission to serve you. Please make it your mission to support us. Thank you.